Welcome to Feeling Seen, the podcast about the movies that make us feel seen. Today we are throwing it back to one of our favorite interviews, our conversation with filmmaker Justin Simien. Justin first broke onto the scene with his 2014 film Dear White People, which was adapted into a Netflix series. He's the mind behind the horror satire Bad Hair, and last year he helmed Disney's Haunted Mansion. When Justin was on Feeling Seen, he had cooked up a show in the nonfiction realm, Hollywood Black, which we will get into together. It chronicles the critical history of Black creatives in cinema. When we asked Justin for his character pick, he came back with a film that was brand new to us, even though it's been around since 1968. If you haven't seen it, still stick around, because our discussion of, wait for it, Symbiopsychotaxiplasm Take 1 will probably convince you why it is worth your time. Stick around for our interview with Justin and a fresh one quick thing near the end of our episode. Justin Simien, what else do the people need to know about you?
I don't know. I don't know what anyone needs to know about me, but I'm excited to be here. This is a project that's been so close to my heart and that I didn't even know was going to end up being a docu-series at one point. So, and I love the premise of your show, Feeling Seen. It just sort of, I think that's kind of always my goal when I'm making something is who can I mean, there's lots of goals, but one of the things I cherish is being able to make space for people. The way cinema allows you to sort of do that is one of my favorite aspects of it. And nothing touches my heart more than when someone comes out of my movie and says, "Oh my God, I never thought I would see myself in the way that you portrayed that." So it's a wonderful place to be.
Well, with Making Hollywood Black, which is an adaptation of a book by Donald Bogle, what were ways in which you felt surprised by how you felt seen through this chronicling of a century of influence of Black creators in the entertainment industry? And what were ways that you were perhaps less surprised? Like, what did you expect versus what did you not expect to find?
Well, it's like I was really inspired by the James Baldwin quote that you think your pain is unprecedented until you read. And I was in a pain point in my career, and it just sort of felt like no matter what I did, no matter how I approached it, even though I was doing what I loved and I was being authentic and all that, it just hurt. It really, really hurt, and it was crushing. And I just wanted to read some stories that would make me feel inspired, frankly. But what Donald does in his books and what we wanted to do in the series is he helped me as a Black person look into lives and look past certain I don't know, cultural mores, let's call them, that would otherwise repel me. So for instance, somebody like Burt Williams, whose image I've seen hundreds of times without knowing his name. This was the first Black superstar in America, but he was also a minstrel. He performed in blackface, and so because the images of him are in blackface, I would just naturally assume, well, there's nothing over there for me. That's horrible for him, but there's nothing that speaks to me about that story. But Donald brings you inside of those stories to the people, and you start to realize, oh my God, this sort of Black genius exists even inside of the most degrading images and archetypes. And it's and I began to see myself in people and in places that before I was not able to. And it gave me strength and it gave me fire to keep fighting the battles that I'm fighting, because nothing I'm going through is as hard as what Burt Williams went through, as hard as Oscar Micheaux or Hattie McDaniels or somebody like that. So Donald has a way of bringing you into these things that maybe feel a little prickly, a little problematic, might make you feel some disturbing things, but he does it with love.
Well, and you sit too at like the intersection of both Black film history and queer film history and Black queer film history. And
that's right.
I'm a big horror fan. I'm a producer on the Queer for Fear docuseries. Looking into that, it was remarkable to hear from so many people who sat and gave these beautiful testimonials about their identification with the monstrous. And, from the sort of outrageous, vengeful version of that, of like, if I could have had my Carrie moment and burned down the whole damn school with them all in the gym, I would have done it, kind of thing, to the agony of the Frankenstein story and watching this person who was not asked to be built, but who was and was put in this world and could not be accepted. And I think it's something that comes up a lot on this show, the deftness that queer people, the deftness that otherized people within the entertainment industry have with creating worlds of imagination. And I think it's a kind of superpower that we develop because we have to, at a very young age, get very used to the hard work of imagining ourselves where we are told we do not belong.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because, I sit at that intersection and there's so many similarities. Like the thing about queer spirit is that it can't be killed. Even when you legislate against it, even when you say we can't tell stories about it, even all of that, we still show up. We still can identify each other. We still can find ways to signify what we're really about underneath whatever artifice we're operating under. And the same is so true for Blackness. Now, Blackness is different because you can see Blackness coming, most of the times, not all the time, by the way, but most of the times you can see Blackness coming, and yet and still, it's very similar. The blackface example of Burt Williams is like, they hid him in all this paint and all this stuff and all these degrading stereotypes, and yet he was signifying to us all kinds of things about liberation and about being the smartest person in the room and humbleness and honesty that the average person doesn't necessarily see in there. So there's so much that I think belongs in the same conversation about both of those experiences. And in the same way, when white people are not even intending to talk about Blackness in the movies, we still show up in the same way that queer people show up. It might look like King Kong. It might look like Darth Vader in an all black suit with a black man's voice. And that may not literally be how people are interpreting it, but in the same way as with queer cinema, people have an interesting way of telling on themselves and telling on their forbidden thoughts, even when it's been legislated out of the story. And it's our job on the other side of that to illuminate that for people, to bring more of that to the conscious.
Well, and that gets exactly something that I was most captivated by in the character choice that you brought, which is a fascinating and meaty choice for us to dive into. Please tell us who we will be discussing and from what film.
So the character I picked is William Greaves, who is actually played by William Greaves in a documentary made by William Greaves. It's called Symbiopsychotaxiplasm.
Yes.
It's a very long title.
Take One, I believe. Is it Take One?
Take One. I was about to say it's like only part of it.
Of course.
Anyway, Terry, your job is that you're the person that is in charge of filming this film being filmed. Right. Okay? Hey, where's the switch on this goddamn thing? Yeah. If sometimes you see us in trouble, then you come and help us out. You know what I mean? But otherwise, if you see cars going by, you can integrate that into the general action if you want to. Or if you see an old lady walking a dog, here's an old lady.
Well, I didn't understand. What did you say about who's supposed to be in charge of the actors? I mean, filming the actors?
You and I are going to be filming the actors. I mean, the two of us.
Don't come into my shot.
Are going to be filming the actors continuously. You're going to be filming me and the actors, and I'm going to be filming the actors. And Terry is going to be in charge of filming the whole thing, you see. And I'm saying to him that if he sees the two of us in trouble, then he'll come and help us.
But essentially, this is 1968, and William Greaves is a big black man. And when I mean that, he is just unmistakable. He's a tall, big man, and he was an actor, so he's got a voice, he's got like a thing about him. And you're watching this documentary of him making a movie that you'll never see, that will never come out. Because the point of that documentary is how people operate in the making of something that they consider super liberal. This is 1968. He's a black director, but most of his crew is white people. And a lot of them are like white film people, who are very sophisticated. They're kind of patting themselves on the back for recognizing.
They're really giving off like the mores of the liberals of the day in 1968.
Absolutely. And are completely unaware of their own racism and how that is sort of seeping into how they view William Greaves as the director of this project.
Well, we were sitting around the other night, and in talking, a few of us, we realized that here is an open-ended film with no plot, that we can see, with no end that we can see, an action that we can't follow. We're all intelligent people. The obvious thing is to fill in the blanks, to create for each of our own selves a film that we understand. And if we try to think about the reasoning of the director for allowing us the opportunity to do this, giving us the circumstances that enable us to be able to sit here, we can only conclude, at least we did last night, that he wanted it like this.
And eventually they have access to film equipment, and William Greaves is sort of pushing and inspiring everybody to sort of self-narrate and sort of like include themselves in his documentary. And so they film this footage of them essentially trying to overthrow William Greaves as the director of the project. And William Greaves, who had no idea they were having these discussions, when he starts to cut the film together, includes that in the film. And it becomes really the center point of it.
There were like 5 of us, 5 of the members of the crew. That's all the people, all the people who are sitting here right now, are members of the crew. The director does not know that we are photographing, this scene. We're doing it on our own. And we were sitting there, and it occurred to us, while we were trying to figure out what the film was about, that we should be filming this.
Yeah, like he wants us to help him
Right,
make a
because
film.
we're
That's
really
obvious.
the only people who are in a position so far to be able to comment, about the film, because the director, Bill Greaves, he is so far into, making the film that he has no perspective. And if you ask him, what is the film about, he just gives you some answer that's just vaguer than the question. I mean, it just is so vague that that it'd be better if you hadn't asked the question in the first place. And if you ask the actors what they think the film is about, all they can tell you is what they thought of the lines that they were reading.
So yeah, that's the movie I bring to us today. That's the character I bring to us.
One of the most fascinating things to watch about this is it's them filming a movie and them filming the process of the movie being filmed to create and then having the crew, a secondary crew, and then a third crew. Their job is to just capture wild experience because they're filming this narrative in Central Park, and they're just out in the wild. They get stopped at one point by the police who were like, "Hey, do you have permits to be here?" And we cut away to a man in a rowboat at one point. William Greaves wants to film a voluptuous woman riding on horseback going past them. It's fuck it, let's do it live kind of situation.
Yes.
And as you with his decision to cut in these, they're just sitting in, it feels like a sort of green room somewhere, and the crew is discussing, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's actually a bad director. My problem here is with the script. He's actually a bad actor as well, and you can feel him perform, and they're saying this, you can feel him performing his personality when the cameras are on versus when it's not. And so what he sets up for them to do is expose who they are and then allow himself to be vulnerable enough to be I'm going to cut in these condemnations of me into the final product of my film because it is worth unearthing the truth within this experiment, which is a fascinating way to both take control of and cede control as a director.
Yes, and it sets a tone for all, in my opinion, what reality TV is in 1968, what it means to produce, because he understood innately that when the camera is on a person, somebody else shows up, some other aspect of their normal everyday personality can't help but sort of come out, and it exposes them in a way that they don't expect. And the other thing he does, and what made me feel so seen by this, and I saw this maybe a few years ago, and I was literally pissed. I was outraged. I'd never seen it before because it would have saved me so much gaslighting as a film director to have seen it, and he normalized what happens, I think, on every set for everybody, but it has a specific kind of sharpness when you're Black and you're at the head of a production, and then it's in Hollywood. So most of the times, most Black people are going to be heading crews and productions that are filled with people who don't look like them and who are answering to people who don't look like them. And what he shows in that is the film director is an object of constant projection. The crew is projecting their best and worst qualities onto the director. The actors are projecting their best and worst qualities onto the director. The audience eventually is going to project onto the story that director's telling. Who is that person and where do they go? Where do they have to go in order to direct everyone, even though they're at the top of the food chain, supposedly, they're actually the object of everyone. It's just like you said, it's you have control, but in order to really take control, you have to cede a lot of control as a filmmaker. And it's a very weird and complicated process, and it doesn't feel the way you think it will feel. There is an animosity that you sense is bubbling just below the surface, and you're not quite sure where it's coming from. There's a resistance that you feel, but no one will cop to. You just feel all of these things, but no one will say up front what it is that they're doing and how they're operating. And this movie just exposes all of that in just the most bravura fashion. It is so fresh to this day.
And it feels like I watched it and I texted producer Marissa like probably about 10 minutes in. I was like, this feels like Waiting for Guffman, but for real. Like there is there's a surface level just sort of like comedy to it where like
absolutely
because
the movie they're making is hilarious in my opinion. The dialogue is so nuts. Like that movie should never come out, and it's hilarious that they're just committing to it, and it's so funny.
You don't even have the courtesy to tell me what's going on.
I am a woman.
And?
I am a woman, Freddie. I am not a fool. And if you think I'm going to stand around like some idiot with egg on my face while you play your friggin' games, you've got another thing coming.
What?
I saw you. I saw you looking at him, and I saw him looking at you. I saw that whole thing.
Him?
That's right, him. That's right, him. Him. A little faggot that everybody knows all about.
Alice, what are you? Some kind of nut?
It's almost like watching like a Snatch Game version of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is invoked in this movie. Totally. And it's fascinating, like reading, like after watching, I had never seen it before either, so this was my first time watching it, but like reading about William Greaves as I'm watching it and listening to people underestimate him. Yes. And then understanding his bio, where he's a prolific documentarian. At this point, had already put out noted documentaries. He went on to teach for years at the Lee Strasberg Institute. He decamped from the United States to Canada to make and create there because he wanted to get away from, in making his sort of like Baldwin exit from the country to exercise greater creative freedom somewhere else because of the way racism was hampering him here. Like, you read about the intention, the mastery, the bravery, the multi-hyphenate nature of this man's career, and then you watch all these people sell him short and say bad actor, bad director, bad writer, when he is notable in all such capacities. It doubles down on the comedy if you like start to get yourself the backstory as you're watching it happen. The ghastly comedy.
That's right. And just the audacity of him to, again, discover this footage of them saying that about himself and having the mastery of putting it in. Because he gets the last laugh, because of course they seem like idiots, but also he was unfathomable for his time. I mean, he's still unfathomable. He is a literal Black genius, and people, even the most well-meaning liberal people who are congratulating themselves for supporting him, could not comprehend those two things being in the same vessel. They just couldn't. And he could see that and found a way to humble himself and to humble his ambitions enough to survive as an artist and put these amazing things in the world. Symbiopsychotaxiplasm came out, I think it was the Cannes Film Festival, and they played it completely out of order because they didn't understand what he was trying to do.
What must that have been like?
He was devastated. He was utterly, because not only was it already difficult what he was trying to pull off, but they didn't even understand it on such a basic level that they didn't even know that they were playing it out of order. And so it actually took much time and much convincing for people to tell William Greaves, no, you really actually did something brilliant here. Like, let's re-release it. Let's like revisit this film, because he had buried it. He was so embarrassed by the way it was showcased. And you just like anytime I felt like slighted or have felt underestimated, which is often, or felt like, the word DEI hire is coming up in a lot of discourse, and there's never, I hate to say this, but there's never been a film set I've been on where I didn't feel that coming from somebody or coming from some people, that I was just there because for whatever reason, Black gay is cool right now. That's why I got the opportunity. That Toni Morrison quote comes to mind of how you're constantly expected to explain why you got there and why you have the authority to say the things that you're saying. And that takes up so much energy and time that could be going to the job you're there to do. I just I always knew that that was happening, but I was not able to confirm with certainty that that's what was happening until I saw this movie.
Well, and it feels like that's kind of part of the terrorism of it, is that it's not like you can hand someone a photo of the thing that happened to you and be like, see? And they're like, you're so right. It's right there.
No.
It's just like oxygen. It's just like poisoning the oxygen. And you can't show people air.
No, and you can't even pinpoint it down to a moment or even to a person. Sometimes it's just something you felt. You just felt undermined, and especially if you're a marginal. I mean, look, I think this happens everywhere. It's important for me to say this is a universal experience, but I just think that because the opportunities are far and fewer for Black people, for women, for queer people, it hits in a totally different way. It like vibrates in your soul in a way that like can sometimes be paralyzing. It was paralyzing for William Greaves for this movie. There are times in which it has paralyzed me. And so again, if the goal of movies is to make space for experience and stuff, I just feel like this is a profound one that almost nobody talks about. When we're talking about what's so difficult about making a movie, because there's 100 billion things that are. No one really talks about this aspect of what happens when the leader is really an object of incredible projection.
We are not trying to take the film away from Bill Greaves.
No, but
I
just for 2 hours.
Well, for 2 hours, all right, but he's got the choice to to edit this stuff any way he wants. So we're not, it's not like we've got together to rape the director.
Right.
I disagree.
You think we are doing that?
No, I think that the basic premise is wrong, because I think that a director's film is his mind photographing the world. And I think if you say that you're going to show him what's in his mind or what ought to be in his mind, then you're taking away a director's film from the director.
But he doesn't have to use any of this.
No, he
footage.
doesn't. He doesn't. But to clarify the action.
The word used was rape. The word used was rape.
And I absolutely noticed that, like, by the end, I was like, just watching these people sort of talk down about him and to him. And I was definitely registering that the only two people in those side conversation rooms who were like, he's the director and this is his vision. So if this is his vision, then we have to follow him on that. Like, we have to kind of grant him that grace, because like, we don't get to tell him what's in his mind. The only two people who were saying things like that were the two women on the crew.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Even some of the Black dudes on the crew were like going along with the conversation, but yeah, you feel that. And not only are they so demonstrably wrong because of history, we can zoom out. That's
the ultimate victor history.
Yeah, but in that moment, like, how do you know they're wrong? It really is confusing. My favorite scene from that movie, there's this moment when Bill Greaves he's just walking. He's just like walking around and kind of talking to himself, which is how you direct a movie, by the way. I don't know any other way. Like, you need time to just walk around and try to fix. He just looks so lost and confused, and his back is turned to the camera, and you're hearing all the things that the people are saying about him, and it's just dissolving as he sort of is just like walking around, unaware of the mutiny that's brewing. And it just sort of like, it encapsulated how precarious it feels to be the director, to be on top, to have finally gained your opportunity. And yet, even in those spaces when you're supposed to have been wresting power, you're completely powerless.
Well, and I noted, like, I was, reading some interviews that you'd given as well. And one thing that seemed to match up with watching this movie too was like, you were talking about making Haunted Mansion. And you were saying that, like, I went to film school and there's a traditional way of doing things that you're taught. And then you get on a set and all of it goes out the window. And you realize that there isn't a prescriptive answer for all the challenges you'll face and all the personalities you have to manage. And what this movie also becomes too is a fascinating exercise in watching the task of personality management that is required as a director, and how there couldn't possibly be a way to academically prepare for that. So I could see how getting out of film school, it would be a bit of a shock to be like,
oh my God.
And what the fuck now?
Well, yeah, and I mean, the amount of times you're told about how important rehearsal is, and then you bring it up and people laugh at you, like, what do you mean? We're not budgeting for a rehearsal. You know?
I was going to say, money for rehearsal? Come on!
Yeah, and directorial techniques. I mean, it really, it hits, the rubber meets the road pretty quick in film. And of course, like, I think the only shame about that is when people feel like they're doing it wrong and they remove themselves from the conversation, or they don't even try to get in there because they assume that they don't have the education or they don't have the resources. But that's just not the case. I mean, white men have been doing this their way for a really long time, and they don't time and time again, when you discover the making of some great masterpiece. And one of my favorite movies, look, I got the action figure right here. My favorite movie of all time is 2001: A Space Odyssey. I love this movie. I love Kubrick. No shade on him. But then I read the book, A Space Odyssey, that came out recently about the making of it. And I'm like, he had no idea what he was doing. Every day he walked in there, he was like, I don't know. You know, the sort of famous obelisk that floats around in space, that was supposed to be a pyramid. And they made it. And he was like, well, that looks like shit. So we can't do that. And they just wrapped some matte black paint around, like, you know, I think it was like a cigarette box or something. And that's what that looks like. And I'm like, okay, so they already have given themselves the permission to just be, and to not know, and to get confused, and to find their way, and to get frustrated. And they're allowing themselves to be fully human in their artistic process. You know, maybe the thing that got me here, which is like perfectionism and being extremely buttoned up and extremely prepared, is only half the battle. The other half is like just giving, even if I know that there's a mutiny afoot, even if I can feel the insubordination and the pushback, giving myself permission as an artist to not know everything and to be in a process of discovery. That is a freedom that we deserve to have too. And I think that movie, combined with sort of like, you know, finding out about other processes, seeing things like Apocalypse Now, you know, how those movies were made, like that has been it's like a lifelong just remembrance and training myself. Like, you get to be a human being in this process. And it's actually like vital for you to be a human being in this process. You don't get to the best by being perfect all the time. Like, you have to let yourself be a human, and you have to be okay with people not liking you. Also, that's the other thing.
It's time for a break, but we will be right back with Justin Simien. And then I will have one quick thing before we go about the notion of politics and horror.
Hey, is this Jesse?
This is Jesse.
Hey, this is Stuart Wellington, host of the Flophouse podcast on Max Fun. I'm calling because you've been named Maximum Fun's Member of the Month for February.
Nice.
If you don't mind me asking, what prompted you to start supporting the network, become a Max Fun member?
I was trying to think of when I started listening to the Flophouse, but I think it was something like 2014, 2015.
Oh, wow.
And then actually having a real job in 2021 was what allowed me to actually start supporting.
Congratulations for having a real job and supporting my not real job. So as Member of the Month, you're going to be getting a $25 gift card to the Max Fun store,
Awesome.
a special Member of the Month bumper sticker, and a special priority parking spot at Max Fun HQ in Los Angeles.
It's awesome to support you guys, to support Max Fun. I get endless joy and entertainment.
If you're a Max Fun member, you can become the next Max Fun member of the month. Support us at MaximumFun.org/join.
Most of the plants humans eat are technically grass.
Most of the asphalt we drive on is almost a liquid.
The formula of WD-40 is San Diego's greatest secret.
Zippers were invented by a Swedish immigrant love story.
On the podcast Secretly Incredibly Fascinating, we explore this type of amazing stuff.
Stuff about ordinary topics like cabbage and batteries and socks.
Topics you'd never expect to be the title of the podcast. Secretly, incredibly fascinating.
Find us by searching for the word secretly in your podcast app.
And at MaximumFun.org.
Do you feel like where you're at in your experience, TV, you've done film, you've done docuseries, like you've worked in a lot of mediums, you've worked at like the most independent levels, and you've made the Haunted Mansion for Disney. Do you feel like that is a process you are at a place where you can allow yourself to just sink into it more freely, or is that something you still like have to coach yourself into, given what you feel like you can be up against a lot of the time?
Definitely I have to coach myself into, and it's a line, there's an edge between when do I stick up for myself and when do I capitulate or listen to what I'm being told. And the answer isn't the same all the time. Like, like the right answer is not always to stick to my guns. Sometimes the right answer is like, no, this is actually feedback I probably don't want to hear, but I need to take in right now. And what you got to figure out is when it's this and when it's that. Sometimes it's both, and that's hard to find. Like that takes a lifetime to find. But what has been kind of key for me is there's always something or some things that are just mine that I have not announced, that my agents are not out selling, that I'm not being paid to develop. I'm just doing it. And Hollywood Black, by the way, was one of those things.
I was going to ask if Hollywood Black fell into that category. It seems like something it could.
And eventually, of course, we brought people in and all that, but like there's always like a nascent stage that is just for me. And I try to keep that stage as long as I can. And sometimes it's a real struggle. Sometimes my agent will be like, "How'd that script come in?" I'm like, "Please ask me in 3 more months," because I just need the space to do all of that you're talking about, to not feel like I got to rush it out and put it in a bow. But it's still messy, and I haven't figured out politically how it will operate in the world, and I don't know what I want to say. I'm just channeling right now. That's kind of how I've learned to work with it. And when it's not me, when it's not my money, it's not my time. Ultimately, I have to cater to to my sponsor, whether that's a studio or a financier.
You are the artist, and you have a patron at times.
I have a patron, yes, and they all had patrons.
Where are the artist patrons anymore? Where are those people that are just like, here's my personal overall deal to you. Relax into your creativity. We've really slacked in modern times with patrons.
They exist, but like everything, they've been absorbed into the corporate schema, and so now when you have a patron, you owe them a lot more than you did before in exchange.
I see every American man at some time in his life saying these lines to every American woman. Every American woman says to every American man, and where are we? Nothing changes. Nothing is revealed. And it's almost as if these lines were planted in their heads when they were born, that they knew when they were 3 days old that one day they'd say to their wives, "You're cutting my balls off." And then every woman knew when she was a little girl that someday, here's this line in her head, you're ineffectual, some variety of ineffectual. You're a faggot.
You can't allow me to be a woman.
Right, you're a faggot, you're weak, you're this, you're that.
That's right.
It's doomed to happen. So here's Bill. He's the director, and this is the sense he's the director. He writes this dialogue and hands it to poor Freddie and poor Alice.
But what throws me is that he's in a sense written himself apart in the film, and as soon as you turn the camera on, he turns on. I think I said to you, turns on, and he's like a bad actor. He turns on, and he doesn't turn off into his natural self till the camera stops. And this throws me every time because there's Bill throwing lines away.
This is the thing about Bill thinks of himself as an actor. You see, that's a part. Bill is an actor.
No, I think Bill is a bad actor, and somehow he's trying to live out his actor's life through this film.
I feel like just like the overarching theme of all of this is people telling on themselves, and you have the sound guy who you can tell is like, you've had a fight with that guy on film Twitter kind of thing. Like he feels like that guy, and he's coming at it from this really like world mind perspective of how people engage, and the script should be this other way because this is how people talk and this is how life is. And I just, one of my favorite parts in this movie is it was so entertained when he starts kind of going on about how like really like this is like the banality of life. We can know like the universality of like at some point like every man knows that he's going to like accuse a woman of being a frigid bitch, and every woman knows she's going to accuse a man of not being man enough. I was like, what is your life?
Well,
sir?
That's the thing. That guy is on every set and in many positions. And there's something about filmmaking. It's so provocative. When I said that object of projection thing, it brings out things in people that are really nuts. But everyone somewhere, even though they won't admit it, there's this moment when they think they could do it better. They think that they're the ones that have the key and not this person at the top.
Yeah.
And it's almost like what William Greaves is saying, like, well, that could be true, but you're not the person at the top. And this isn't your movie. And because of the way movies are made, we have to do it this way, where like it is focused into what the director thinks is right or wrong. But yet, like, the process cannot help but provoke those kinds of it happens on every movie, especially when the director's not around. Everyone starts to argue about how they would do it and da-da-da. That's what movies do to people. And there's got to be a way to harness that energy for the greater good, but it's much harder when you are Black, when you are other, when you are something that they can sort of make a story about why you're not qualified and they are. Because again, this happens on every movie, but it doesn't overtake every movie.
Right.
There are people who were saying those kinds of things about Francis Ford Coppola, but they would never try to wrest control from him. You know what I mean? In the middle of one of his shootings. So it's interesting.
Well, have you found that does it manifest in ways that are more tailored to its context? Like, again, having worked from small budget independent on something like Dear White People, which has has an air of provocation to it. It is a satire. And I know so many people that have gone to Chapman. So since meeting so many people that have gone to Chapman, like, watching that movie now has so much more value even than I'm like, wow, this is a great conduit into thinking about this movie. The Chapman Film School specifically. And but does that kind of like, if I'm a kicker and I could have put that 60 yards through the uprights kind of thing, does it take different tones on the scale of something like a Dear White People, for example, or up to something like The Haunted Mansion? Or is it kind of just like, no matter the size of the environment you're in, it manages to matriculate out in the same way?
Literally, no matter the size,
wow,
no matter the subject matter, no matter the budget, there is always that energy. The question is, how protected do I feel?
Yeah.
And I don't always feel very protected, but I have to say it is everywhere. And it just so happens that maybe the more money that's being spent on it, or if you're like working on a piece of IP, some of those people have a lot of power. Maybe that's the biggest difference, is that on an independent project, like, people always have opinions, but maybe those people don't really have power. They can't like change your editing schedule. They can't demand reshoots, that kind of thing. But they can on bigger projects, but the energy is exactly the same. And actually, like, kind of being on something like Haunted Mansion and realizing that at the so-called top of the mountain, this is the same thing. It's the same exact job. It's just like, there's just more people maybe, and there's more pressure, and there's more money, and the tension comes out even different places. But there is a psychological something that happens, and you start to realize, oh wow, that person who was such a dick about having things this way and that way in their contract, maybe they weren't being a dick. Like, maybe like they just learned this lesson that like they have to be completely in control of the creative environment. You know, you hear these stories about directors who have very strange rules about chairs or about what food can be provided. And you're like, God, what a dick. But then I'm like, but maybe not. Like, maybe establishing that level of control of your environment is just the only way that artist and their particular nervous system can get through this process, you know? And maybe like, I don't need anything that draconian, but maybe on the next one, I do need to kind of step up and be like, actually, I really would prefer it if you did that and you went through that person and you did, you know, maybe that's okay, because it actually does have an effect on the project.
That's interesting. It's like a proxy show of authority.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And if you're like, oh my God, we haven't been sitting on chairs because of this director, maybe we don't have the right to, you know, try and take over other aspects of their process. For me, the push and the pull, though, is that like, I never want people to be too scared to tell me the truth. I never want that. I recognize that everyone's got blind spots, and particularly as an ADHD kid, I can get tunnel vision on certain elements of a production, and I need to depend on certain people to tell me the truth. What I don't love is the power struggle. That part, I'm still always figuring out ways to try to mute that. It's the power struggle. I disagree with me all you want. Maybe call me an idiot, I guess, in private. But let's the roles though need to stay put. There is a reason for the hierarchy on a production like this.
Well, and I feel like with Greaves, what you see in the arc of his career is somebody who he took ownership of the means of production in the ways that he could, going to Canada, like working primarily in like underground and independent cinema. And he like was a producer on like one Hollywood title in his career. And otherwise he kind of stayed away from the system. What was your hope in establishing Culture Machine, your shingle? And how has that, you know, in your own seizing of means of production in some capacity, like how does that enable you to work in a way that is more sustainable for you? Like what has the impact of that been?
Thank you for asking that. That's a really cool question. I think it's because I recognize that as an artist, like I needed some protection. I needed some foundation. I needed a way to train people, to train a staff, to establish certain practices that I like, don't like, and to not sort of have to be like a leaf floating in the wind, grasping onto whatever is available, but to actually have a way to set my own course, to develop things, to have the ability to create space. I have an amazing team of people, some of whom are on this Zoom, who are essentially like they are developing alongside me and creating projects so that I can create some space and run off and do my own little weird thing that's not going to maybe make anyone any money right now, but I need to do it for my heart and my soul. And now that that's ready, I can come back to that thing. It allows me to sort of do more and create space, protect and create a creative process. And most importantly, and I discovered that I actually enjoy this on Dear White People, the series, do that for other people. Like create something that maybe can one day be a safe haven for other artists who are on the cusp of making something great. They just need the right infrastructure. They just need the right people to protect and believe in them. So that's why Culture Machine.
Some of the things that hearten me most watching some people that I know thrive in this industry in the way that they can carve out a niche for themselves is when they make themselves as siloed as possible kind of thing. Not in the sense that they are apart from a creative community, but forging creative community that is, I feel like a sort of most operationalized version of that is what the Duplass brothers have been able to do and how they've been able to sort of franchise themselves out in that way. And then I think Rustic Films with Benson and Moorhead and their producer Dave Lawson has done a really good job of that as well. And watching these enterprises that are people being like, no, but let's like bring it in-house. 99% of the people I know who are creatives in this industry are like, I just want to make things with the people that I care about, that I love. And it's amazing how hard that is made to be.
Well, because we want to be artists, and artists have to exist inside of this capitalist system, but they aren't congruent in a lot of ways. And so these production companies are about sort of helping the artist meet the production cycle in a way that the artist stays protected and the production people, the financing keeps showing up. You know, it is extremely hard to do. And they feel like opposite motivations, to be honest, a lot of the times. But I don't really know any other way. It's sort of like you think about the sponsors. It's like I think we're all trying to figure out how to be our own patrons, you know, inside the system that can take can steal a lot of your focus. To make something great requires a lot of attention and focus. And I've never actually had this luxury, to be honest. I'm still working towards this luxury. But when all of your focus goes, or so much of it is going to the concerns of capitalism and to money and to audience and to all of these things, you are not as focused on the most important thing, which is the piece of art that you're making, the story that you're telling. And as pure as that can be, the rest of that stuff will come, you know, but it's actually really hard to have a pure process.
I've thought so many times, like the intrusive thought I can hardly get rid of is like being like, God, could you imagine how much I imagine how much I could do if I was rich, and not because I could pay for everything, but
Right.
because I wouldn't have to think
Right.
about
That's
the
absolutely it.
surviving aspect of it. Just like, not even because I could pay for all these ostentatious things and projects,
Yes.
but just because I wouldn't have the vast
Yes.
majority of my mental real estate be like, okay, but surviving.
Yeah, yeah, it's wild too because I was telling you, like, making Dear White People in an independent space, your brain, you're thinking like, I don't have a set tomorrow. So while I'm shooting today, I have to also be rewriting the scene tomorrow just so that we can make our production day. And on Haunted Mansion, something like that would never come up, of course. But in the vacuum of that space are a whole set of people that I need to meet with and have Zooms with and convince of this or that or whatever. And it's just interesting because it's always the struggle. It's like, how do I clear the plate? Because actually being an artist looks a lot like play sometimes, and it looks a lot like slacking off sometimes. It looks like disassociating sometimes. And people don't get that. And so they fill that vacuum, and so much of it is just like protecting the space to kind of look like you're not doing anything so that you can, get the inspiration or to work something out that only you can really feel or think about while everyone else is running around with their concerns. Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky and it doesn't quite go away. But I will tell you, money maybe doesn't buy you happiness, but it definitely it can buy you peace of mind if you're not thinking about rent, if you're not thinking about your dinner, if you're not thinking about those kinds of things. It's not even just thinking, it's emotional space. You don't have anxiety about that thing. And so you just have a little bit more room to imagine, It's important.
Well, and I guess my sort of wind down question would be to you, like obviously in an age when we are so inundated with information kind of thing, like there's so much to know and it can feel like, obviously we don't know everything, but we have information accessible to us at every turn. I wanted to talk to you about the value of consolidating and packaging the unseen, in Hollywood Black. And I feel like William Greaves is a part of that history. And I wanted to talk to you about the value in being like, no, but the curation of all this information is still so important.
Yes.
And, just the surprise of like, hey, I know like equity, inclusion, Me Too, Time's Up, all those things, like they're helpful talking points. But at the same time, like I read something of you talking about Hollywood Black where you were like, there isn't a history of Hollywood without the Black history of Hollywood. It's kind of like how, like reproductive healthcare is healthcare. Black Hollywood history is Hollywood history. And I wanted to talk to you about putting that in a place where it can become accessible to people and the value of making things like that accessible.
I mean, it felt very important. It was something I reached for that didn't exist. And I was like, well, why doesn't this exist? Why isn't there a docuseries about this? And I made a TikTok about this, about AI, because it's just, there's certain holes in everyone's understanding of Hollywood that actually can be filled if you understand how Black people exist in Hollywood. I don't think AI took a lot of Black people by surprise. It's not that it's bad or good. It's just that if you're Black and you're in the entertainment space, you definitely have had the experience of something you've innovated and come up with being snatched and appropriated wholesale by the culture. And a lot of people are getting rich and making money off of something you came up with and you're still broke. That is a super common thing that Black people feel all the time. And we have no choice but to encounter that. And suddenly with AI, artists of all stripes are encountering that and are realizing that wherever they have fallen on the caste system of Hollywood, they're not at the top.
Yeah.
And they are still vulnerable to this kind of thing. And when you start to learn about this history, you realize, oh, not only did Black people not stop whenever that would happen, we actually found ways to use that to springboard and drive even more innovation, because it was always like, well, what can we do that they can't copy? Became part of, our thoughts when we're innovating and we're coming up with a new, form of expression. And it actually drove some of the most amazing displays of Black genius and Black artistry. And so that's part of what I mean by the history is not just a siloed off, let's be proud of being Black, which we should, and that's great. But this actually, the history of cinema doesn't really make sense unless you have this component. Birth of a Nation was not just a huge success because D.W. Griffith is the genius. It's a huge success because white people loved minstrelsy. They loved they were used to it. Their grandparents grew up on it. Their children watched it, and the idea of plopping down, however much it was then, 5 cents or whatever, to watch a 2-hour movie made a lot more sense to them if it had this other thing in it that comforted them, that was on their freaking syrup, bottles, this minstrelsy thing. King Kong hits a certain way to white people because it's a big black body. There's just these things that like we don't really think about, that we just sort of accept, but they don't really make sense unless we unpack race and blackness and include that as part of the story. And that was certainly the larger point I wanted to make with this.
Well, I feel like that is a great bow to put on this, and I thank you so much for helping to unpack a bit of the history that you chronicled in Hollywood Black, and also to unpack a slice of that history even more granularly in Symbio by William Greaves. Thank you, Justin Simien, so much for coming on the pod today.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you for watching it and have like I wasn't able to give an answer until like this morning, and I'm so impressed that you devoured it and devoured like aspects of this was such a great conversation, so thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you so much to Justin Simien. That interview was truly a privilege, and honestly, I'm excited that we have recirculated it for you because it was so nice. Why not do it twice? And now that one quick thing before I go, there's been a insurgent, really popular independent horror franchise that has really come into conversation the past couple of years. You might have heard of it, Terrifier, featuring Art the Clown, and helmed in its or led, in its second two iterations, Terrifier 2 and 3, by the actress Lauren Lavera as the final girl. And the director took it upon himself to post a statement about the political, or in his cases, not political nature of Terrifier, saying that it's not a political series. He didn't want to make it a political series. This is just fun. It's just fun. It's just entertainment. The horror movies he grew up on, the ones he loves, that raised him, they were just there for entertainment, and he welcomes fans of all stripes, just as he welcomes, cast and crew of all stripes onto his set to make these movies that they make together happily and in harmony. Come one, come all. No one turned away at the door of the Terrifier franchise, which is, a nice thought. But there was a bit of a equivocating of, listen, we're all just people here and we all just like movies. Listen, there's a political administration in charge right now that is assailing the rights and survival of very specific groups in our community and in society. I just gotta say, horror's political, man. Even the movies that you thought were just like super entertaining, even if the people who made them, or even if you, the filmmaker who made Terrifier, does not wish to engage with the politics of horror, that is totally up to you. It's totally up to you. But the thing is, once that gets out the door, once it hits theaters, once it's circulating and in front of people's eyeballs, sorry, man, art is political. Art is the product of the people who make it. The people who make it are the product of society that has reared them and continues to influence and shape them, and that they continue to respond to in however many ways in their not movie-making lives. But we are still we're not AI. We are still the people making movies, and we have opinions and outlooks, and saying that something, I don't make political art. I hate to say it, my man, that is a political statement to say. From a position of privilege, might I add. And that's just, again, you don't have to engage with the politics of something. You don't. You can watch Black Christmas and be like, this was just scary. And you can do that, 100%. But the assertion that there is a way to strip politicization of cinema once it is out in the, for the public to be consumed, and for everybody bringing their own points of view and their own lenses, and that, forged by that same society that shaped you. It doesn't cut the mustard, my man. Doesn't cut the mustard. And yeah, horror is political. And, one of the things that I try to help me sleep at night that I think about in these extremely horrific times are looking forward to and hoping for a boldness and a brazenness in the most bold and brazen of genres in horror that will help us document and process and hopefully be emboldened by and galvanized by, for those of us who wish to push back and for those of us who need to endure, for those who need to endure. So yeah, horror's political, man. Whether you meant to or not, whether you want it to be or not, cinema is political, horror is political. And, not for nothing, non sequitur, but trans people are real. Trans people are not going anywhere. Trans people are here to stay, regardless of whether or not you take the T off the acronym on something like, I don't know, a .gov website. So that's it. That's our show. You can follow us on Instagram and Feeling Seen Pod, or send us an email at feelingseen@maximumfun.org. We are also on Blue Sky, me and the show. Just search Feeling Seen or Jorcru, Jorcru. You can also still find me on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. The show is produced by Daniel Huesias. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows,
supported directly by you.